killer date. No one suspects a good-looking man. He's too handsome to be a killer. And that's exactly what Michael Holloway used to his advantage. He spent hours at the gym, shaping his already good genes into a chiseled mask. It also helped that he was charismatic, with a smile that made most women double take. He had brilliant green eyes from his mother, paired with light brown hair from his father. At 6 feet in height, he was just a six-pack short of a photoshopped model. Michael knew he was different from a young age. He was 7 years old and on a family trip to Vermont to visit his grandparents. He was an only child of 2 loving only children, and that meant he naturally got a lot of attention. One night, as the adults were out back drinking and talking next to the fire pit, Michael was following his grandparents' old dog around the house. A chirp from the wall clock signaled 8 o'clock, food time. Right on cue, the dog's medicated kibble dropped into its bowl in the laundry room. He watched as the dog slowly scarfed up the food. Towards the bottom of the bowl, there was a clump of kibble that had not broken into smaller pieces. The old dog ate it up without noticing. It gave an abrupt, hiccup-like sound, and then started wheezing. Michael jumped back at first, but watched intently as the dog struggled to breathe. The hard clump of kibble blocked its windpipe. He did nothing as the dog walked around, not knowing what to do and unable to get air. It moved toward the doorway, but Michael stood up and closed the door. The dog looked up at him, its foggy eyes not comprehending what was going on. Michael waited until the dog collapsed. He brushed its soft fur gently until its pulse was gone. That was the first death Michael had witnessed, and so began his secret obsession with the morbid. He knew it was wrong, yet it got him excited like nothing else. Not alcohol, not drugs, not sex. Now he was in his 20s, a year out of college, living on his own in the big city. After years of reading and fantasizing about it, he was finally going to make his move. There was an old diner near his apartment where he often went for late-night meals on his cheat days. Eventually, the staff had gotten used to him and his usual order: a lettuce-wrapped burger with a side of saltless fries. One of the servers, a pudgy man with an acne-scarred face, told him on a particularly slow night that the diner was going broke. "We don't even have real cameras," he said with a laugh. When he noticed Michael look up at the camera on the ceiling, he added, "Those are empty. Pretty much a toy, just to scare people from getting any funny ideas." Michael laughed, flashing his pearly white teeth. The server laughed too, unaware of the mistake he had just made. It was a Friday, like any other for Michael. He got done with work early and went to the gym for 2 hours. To Michael, the only thing that got close to the feeling of a kill was a good pump. He loved feeling the tension of each muscle swell with each rep, almost as if he could feel them growing. Back at his apartment, he took a long shower before getting ready for the night ahead. The first order of plan was to masturbate. He had a big night ahead, and he was not going to let testicular impulses ruin it. Whatever Michael had done to fulfill his darker fantasies in the past, he did cautiously. There was no room for error, especially now. If he were to get caught, he'd rather die than go to rot in a prison cell for the rest of his life. He had gone over the plan over and over in his head, working out any kinks in the logic until he was confident in a plan he could execute. He wanted a pretty woman, someone easy on the eyes, who had moved to the big city on a whim. She had to also be living alone, with no one to check up on her. That is, of course, if he even met a girl that night. He didn't want to rush things. The last thing he wanted was to get overzealous and overlook something stupid. Most importantly, he couldn't get attached. He repeated those words like a mantra as he waited for his food. The bell on the door dinged him out of his head. That's when he saw her. Susan Bennett wanted an uneventful night. It had been a long week, and she wasn't looking for any action. But she knew Michael was the one as soon as she saw him across the diner. Her mind began to race, and she did her best to quiet it down. Keeping her eyes low, she followed the server to the booth right in front of the brown-haired model. If she had a type, Michael was it. She asked for water with no ice to buy her some time and pretended to read the menu. In reality, her eyes kept darting toward him. Her left hand crept into her handbag to check if she had what she needed should the night get frisky, and breathed out a sigh of relief. She also felt around for the pepper spray to use in case of emergencies. Her gaze swept over the menu as she tried to figure out how to approach him. With a head of shiny blonde hair and a curvy body, she wasn't usually the one to make the first move. She didn't have to. "Is this seat taken?" said a smooth voice. Susan looked up to find Michael standing in front of her. His smile distracted her, but she recovered fast. "No," she said, flashing a smile of her own. "It is not." Michael slid into the seat across from her, and she caught the scent of dirty vanilla. She liked it. "Hi," Michael said with an outstretched hand. "My name's Michael. Susan," she said. His hand was cool to the touch. Susan was wearing a low-cut tank top, not for grabbing attention, but because she thought she looked good in it. But she didn't mind, as Michael's eyes quickly glanced down during their handshake. They exchanged some pleasantries and got to know each other. Susan found out that Michael works as a fitness coach, and Michael was amused when he found out that Susan was a freelance designer. "I didn't need to be in the city," she admitted to him. "But things at home were rough, and I kind of just needed an excuse to get out of there. You know, I get it." he said. Parents can be a lot to deal with. Yeah. Her voice was low. I just feel guilty about ignoring them sometimes. I mean, they raised me, put a roof over my head, and fed me. It feels the least I can do is call them once in a while, just to let them know I'm okay. Michael sat back and studied her face. It was beautiful, with the sharp features of her nose and jaw accenting the curves of her cheeks and lips. When I was in college, I took a philosophy class with a pretty eccentric professor. One of the exercises he loved to do was hand out cards with random topics on them and encourage you to debate from that point of view. One day, I got a card that said, "Parents don't deserve anything from their children." Now, I don't think anything is quite that cut and dry, but for the sake of the exercise, I went with it. Susan sipped at her water as Michael went on. The point starts with a sort of analogy. Take your phone, for example. The person, or more likely, people, who made that phone will never use it. In fact, they make it knowing that it's not for them. There was a demand, and they were meeting it. It is a societal role that they choose. My argument was that it was the same for a human. There is a demand, an ecological need to reproduce, to keep the species alive. A person who chooses to have a baby is, in effect, meeting the market demand. To expect something back, monetarily or otherwise, once your job of raising that child is done, is not part of the contract. Michael sat back with a deep breath. Of course, there are holes in that argument, as my classmates pointed out, but you get the gist. Susan watched Michael as he got a sip of his own drink. An iced tea lemonade. "Switched tables, I see," said the server, sliding a lettuce-wrapped burger in front of him. "Here's your order, Michael." "Thanks, Brittany," Michael said. He looked back at Susan to find her smiling at him. He shrugged. "I come here often." Susan's server came back to take her order. "A buffalo chicken wrap, please," she said. He scribbled it down and left to place the order. The conversation continued, nearly uninterrupted, for an hour. By then, Susan had already made up her mind on what she wanted to do. And so had Michael. Michael paid for the meal, refusing Susan's attempts to pay him back. "You saved me from a lonely dinner. This is the least I can do." The city air was cool, and it gave them an excuse to move closer to each other as they walked. Michael said, with calculated hesitation. "I apologize if it's too soon, but my apartment is a block away. I was thinking maybe we could go up for a couple of drinks. Hang out?" Susan felt like it was her lucky day. "That sounds nice," she answered. "If we cut across this alley, we'll be there in 5 minutes. He paused and then added, "If you're okay with that." She said she didn't mind, and they turned into the alley that led to the back of Michael's apartment building. It was quiet inside the halls, and they shook the chill out of their bones. "I live on the 6th floor," We can go wait for the elevator, or we can just take the stairs here. I can't disappoint Mr. Health Coach now, can I? Stairs it is, Michael said, holding the door open for her. Things were going better than he could have hoped, and he did his best not to let his anticipation show. However, as they walked up the stairs, one thing began to bug him. A nagging voice in the back of his head that asked one simple question. Do you love her? He told himself to not get attached and pulled out the door to the 6th floor. It's the second door on the right, 607. The hallway was empty, and there were no cameras in the stairwell. No one knew that she was there. Michael opened the door to his apartment and let her step inside first. He had lit a candle while he got ready, and though it had been nearly 2 hours since it was out, the fragrance still hung in the air. This is a nice place, Susan said. The studio apartment was sparsely furnished, but everything felt purposeful. A rustic red couch paired with an oak coffee table. A matching oak dining table sat in the corner of the kitchen area. Numerous paintings hung on the beige walls, and a few plants bordered the sliding door to the balcony. Thank you, he said, taking her coat from her and hanging it in the front closet. He brushed his hair out of his way and smiled to himself. She was here. Everything he wanted. He took a second to admire her a distance as she looked at his record collection. So, what would you like to drink? He asked. She said. Anything strong? Like a whiskey? Michael knelt down and picked up a bottle of aged Kentucky bourbon. Will this do? Works for me. Michael took out 2 glasses and dropped in 2 thick blocks of ice. This a sweet collection you got here, Susan said. Do you mind if I play one? Go right ahead. The records were alphabetically ordered, and Susan slid her finger along the slide until she made it to Kind of Blue. She slipped it out of its cover and put on the record player. Michael froze when he heard the first few notes of his favorite record, and then shook his head. Great choice, he said. He took up the glasses and walked over to her. They sat down together on the sofa, sipping at their drinks and taking in the music. Susan closed her eyes and laid her head back. The sight was so dizzying that Michael placed the cool glass against his temple. I'll be right back, he said. He placed his glass on an old jazz-themed coaster and walked into the bedroom. He got what he needed, a candle and lighter, but stood in the dimly lit room a while longer. He pictured his hands around Susan's throat, and his heart rate picked up. He held his breath for a few seconds, and then slowly let it put. Then, once more. His fingertips began to get tingly, and he knew he was ready. When he went back into the living room, Susan was staring out the sliding door. She jumped when he flicked the lighter. Do you like vanilla? He asked. Susan nodded, and then returned her attention to the city outside. Michael grabbed his drink and downed the rest of it. Did something catch your eye? No, Susan answered. It's just this city. Always so alive, so big. It just reminds you how small you really are. Michael adjusted his posture and approached her from the back. Not to me, he whispered. Not in here. Susan turned around to face him. You think so? From where I'm standing. You're all I see. He leaned forward slowly and waited, eyes locked, for her to move in. She hesitated for a second and then closed the distance. The kiss was explosive. Once their lips met, they did not separate. Michael closed the blinds with one hand while the other caressed Susan's face. His thumb gently brushed her smooth cheeks. Michael's hands snaked down, and without missing a beat, he picked her up. His firm hands supported her thighs as he walked toward the sofa. It wasn't until he laid her down on the sofa that their lips parted. Susan glanced at the one empty glass on the table and grabbed her own to finish, as Michael made a show of unbuttoning his shirt. His pecs were dusted with curly brown hair, and Susan ran her fingers across his chest. Michael bent back down to kiss her once more. His hands ran along her body, his mind resisting the urge to carry out the plan he had set out on. Every time he worked up the courage to move his hands to her neck, his heart pushed them down. Susan moaned lightly under him, and he thought of his own pleasure. His heart rate picked up once more, and the tingling sensation returned to his fingers. As they kissed, he put his left hand around her throat and began to give it some pressure. Susan didn't react, either unaware of the sensation or unbothered by it. After a few moments, he tightened his grip. Susan pulled away from him, but still didn't fight him. She simply stared up at him, her breath caught in her throat, doing his best to keep his heart rate under control. Michael closed his hand around her throat even further. Worry flickered in her eyes, but panic didn't set in until Michael put his right hand around her throat too. His hands wrapped all the way around her delicate throat, and she began to flail as she realized what he was doing. Her hands slapped at his biceps and then reached hopelessly for his face. She tried to croak something out, but he tightened his grip further still. For a moment, he thought he saw her laugh to herself, but it was soon replaced by a deadpan expression as her brain lost oxygen. Her eyes rolled back in her head, and he kept squeezing with both hands, watching her intently as the life left her body. Her body stopped moving, but he didn't relent until he was sure of what he had done. There was no going back. As he pulled his hands off of her, her body gave one final shudder. Michael's breathing was heavy, and a thick layer of sweat coated his head. He stared at his hands. If not for the fact that he could see them attached to his body, he felt as if they were not his own. He started to stand up, to move to his room, to grab his camera, when he stumbled to the ground. Disoriented, he sat up on the ground. His foot had knocked over Susan's purse, and a small white bottle rolled out. His vision grew blurry as he reached for the bottle. Inside were the remnants of a fine, white crystalline powder. Michael rolled the bottle over until he saw the writing on the side in cute little letters. Aconite. He dropped the bottle and tried to stand, but his muscles refused to hold him up. He collapsed on the ground. Michael's heart began to skip beats, and all he could do was lie on the carpeted floor and stare up at Susan's outstretched hand, lifeless. The last thing Michael saw was the tattoo of a dog on Susan's wrist, its black eyes staring down at him. They do it with mirroring. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Morpheus, the Matrix, da-duff, 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 da-duff. Lewis had stopped counting his heartbeats as he flung himself behind the very convincing rendering of pallets. An alley was such a cliché place for a fugitive to hide, but he wasn't complaining. The automatons in pursuit were laughably simplistic in their depiction, fit and buff. But their hive mentality meant individual thought and innovation were limited. Being the last human in a world of digital and electronic contrivance wasn't always a walk in the park. But Lewis at least knew that his humanity offered one particular skill that eluded the bots that now populated the planet due to the limitations of their pre-programmed schemata. He could extemporize, paying careful attention to his immediate environment and possible pursuers. Lewis crawled towards the darkness at the back of the lane, an open blankness ready to envelope him and offering safety in invisibility. At the sound of running footsteps running in his general direction from the street, he sped up his movements till he reached a vertical surface blocking his path, a solid wall, he noted, that wasn't too high and could easily be scaled with enough momentum and motivation. Sounds of huffing conversation neared, and two figures came to a standstill at the mouth of the alley, outlined in the street lamp light. The two golems were doing a fair imitation of exhaustion, but Lewis knew a tell would appear, if only he looked for it. That one small element that didn't belong, something asynchronous or offbeat, which indicated a flaw in the design of the system. He watched for it now and was not disappointed. A ghostly white cat ran across the poorly lit entrance, and neither of the two policemen batted an eye, as though it weren't even there. Their programming clearly wasn't compatible with unforeseen interference. He's got to be somewhere in these streets. Bloody hell, you'd think he'd be controllable. The one with his hands on his hips puffed. Ha, not him. He never gives over with his convictions. accordin' to them lot. A fair imitation of an East End accent. But Lewis wasn't fooled. Since the takeover 15 years ago, performances of normal human life and interactions had become shockingly, scarily accurate. At first, the disparity between those and what was real people, real situations, had been easily identifiable. Poor renderings had been common and easily dismissed. But now the imitations of the living had become so lifelike, seemed so authentic, that he'd had to become more and more alert. His singular focus, some would say paranoia, had benefited him initially. But once the majority of humanity had fallen to the pervasive evil that had come over them all, he had eventually been tracked down and imprisoned for his perceptiveness. It was ironic, he thought, that the nations of the modern world had fallen before this insidious enemy without a shot being fired. Without even skipping a beat, they had taken over everything. And he didn't even know who or what they were, only that they existed. Like a virus, they'd infiltrated the Earth's societies, and now even he couldn't truly untangle what was real from what was programmed reality. "Keep going?" one suggested, to which the other only nodded. Both continued past his hiding place, and he took the opportunity to try and heave himself over the wall. Despite having lost so much muscle tone during captivity, Lewis could leverage his significant height in the endeavor, at least. "Wish I could bend it like that spoon in the movie," he muttered wryly as he clambered over haphazardly, remembering how annoyed Mav used to get that most people didn't truly get that scene, that it's Neo's perception of the spoon that is being manipulated. Well, at least I wish I could bend my perception of the wall, then, Lewis amended once on the other side, as though the wall cared about the distinction, then settled against it to catch a bit of sleep. He was sure the automatons wouldn't circle back to this area, and definitely not when they thought he'd made a run for it. At daybreak, or their version of daybreak, at least, knowing he was somewhere in central London, he'd head northeast, the direction of the one place he could always find. No matter how much the powerful overseers manipulated reality, he needed to know if she was still there, and whether or not she was still herself. Lou! He knew he was dreaming, but leaned into it. An Alice who wanted to stay in this wonderland for however long he could. Dreams, these days, were authentic. Reality, in contrast, was coldly artificial. "Jolly, we're here!" He'd shouted back that long-ago day, before the end came and the world changed forever. There they all were, Mum with her iron-gray hair, and Dad with his vague smile. A happy family, sitting on the pebbly beach, awaiting Juliet's arrival with the ice creams she'd promised. Her form appeared in the distance, a slight haze from the sunny day warping her form in unpredictable, non-programmed ways. Jolly Juliet, his baby sister, who absolutely personified her nickname, was unwarped by imposed matrices of zeros and ones. Falling down on the blanket beside them, she handed around half-melted lollies and completed the scene of a perfect day by the sea. Unfiltered. "So, Lou, how are you?" Jolly sing-songed, their parents distracted by an inane argument like all the others they so often indulged in. "All good. Moved in with Mav. And everything's fine. So, are you sure? No offense, but you and Carrie were together for ages, and now it's over. It'd be completely normal to feel, I said I'm fine. No need to harp on about it. Mav's been really cool about everything, letting me lease his basement. And we have loads in common." Unfortunately, past Lewis's tone in this rerun didn't convey the nonchalance he'd aimed for during the actual event. But current Lewis didn't have the heart to try and edit this experience in his subconscious. It would be sacrilegious to do so, his dreamscape being the only truth he was able to access under the new, psychologically subversive system imposed on them all. "Leave off, why don't you?" "Oh, come on, Lou. I'm your sister, and I love you. So I think it's important to talk about things, get them out in the open, rather than pretending and lying to yourself that everything's okay. And look, I don't need all this touchy-feely, femoid crap to get over the breakup. Why can't you just be normal about it?" Jolly's face fell. Then her expression became recalcitrant. "And I suppose Maverick is normal about it, is he? Not pulling you into his pseudo-intellectual online world of misogynists and their red pill content, right? Where words like femoid are normal? You channel his himbo energy in the worst way, and doesn't that make you a beta to his alpha, or whatever, according to his people?" Jolly sneered, spitefully and hysterically. Lewis remembered thinking at the time, trust her to go all out. She was always like that, pure joy and sunshine, or outright loathing and malice. Dream Lewis's response was not very mature, but at that precise moment, it receded from his grasp as he returned to consciousness, only to be overwhelmed by the reality of his situation. His escape returned to him in full force, cementing the importance of finally having clarity on whether or not Jolly was still herself. He couldn't go back to his cage, back to counting every breath and heartbeat without knowing. Duff. 62. 2 down from the last count, but a good average of the preceding 78 calculations. Lewis had waited for the next opportunity to restart the count. The digital clock's flickering screen had snapped from one number to the next. everything was zeros and ones. Everything. Reality was constructed of the patterns of alternating null to one, a dichotomy that resulted in an infinite number of universes. Lewis had shaken his head in annoyance. His momentary distraction had caused him to miss the arrival of the new minute, meaning he'd have to wait for the next to begin counting once more. Monitoring was key. Being the only human left meant he had to keep on top of all his own stats. You couldn't trust the machines. Their programming meant they could mislead you through no fault of their own, or in attempting to undermine your free will. When the next temporal transition had been heralded by the flashing screen high against his cell wall, Lewis had smartly slapped 2 fingers to his wrist and counted carefully. Dud-dove, dud-dove, dud-dove. He had managed to maintain focus on his task, even when the door of his small prison had flown open and the humanoid bot assigned as his jailer had quietly entered. Though he had ostensibly ignored its presence, Lewis had covertly watched the approach and marveled at the genius of the creators of this reality. The semblance of humanity was absolutely flawless and completely immersive in its accuracy, perfect in its imperfect behavioral idiosyncrasies. Ernie had sniffed disconsolately and waddled closer with his metal tray of paraphernalia. But there was always a tell, and Lewis had waited on tenterhooks for it. Then, there it had been. The digital watch screen had flickered 3 times in the exact same pattern, like Morse code. All right there, Lou. Ernie had initiated his usual pre-programmed patter, a slight nasality to the quality of his vocal realization. Lewis had finished his last count, for now, 67. The tempo had definitely increased in the last 15 seconds of Ernie's presence. Then he had smiled at his captor, feigning a normal interaction between people. It didn't do to behave outside the parameters set as the norm for social interactions between the technological golems this facility housed. It would inevitably initiate protocols to encourage, even force, a return to the standard programming setting. Thus, politeness and normalcy were to be strived for in Lewis's every action, with nothing to upset the preset balance in his current reality. I'm fine. How about you? That cold seems to be improving. Again, faux sympathy had been called for. Ernie had shrugged and smiled good-naturedly, setting his tools down. Can't complain. I'm on the mend, for sure. The bionic being had been evincing all the behaviors and symptoms of a person suffering from the flu over the past 2 weeks. Reddened nose and eyes, hacking cough, and a faucet-like nose. The subtlety of the lie he found himself immersed in was truly impressive, an achievement of gargantuan proportions, Lewis was sure, considering an entire world lay within its purview. Luckily, he was convinced they hadn't yet managed to infiltrate his mind in the form of his dreams. for it was there that he experienced many odd interactions without repercussions, and no breaks in the perfect rendering of a fake world as the ones he suffered when he was awake. It was the only space where he could revisit the before and not have it corrupted by the control exerted through oversight. Next week, me and the missus are off for our holidays. Wasn't gonna let this old flu bug eat into me free time, you know? A wink. Conspiratorial, and meant to take Lewis in. He wasn't. He knew better. But he had to convince Ernie, and all the others for that matter, that he wasn't wise to their game and had seen through the matrix of obfuscation to the truth of this constructed reality. An unreality parading as the genuine thing sounds lovely. I hope you enjoy it. Cheers, mate. Now, business as usual, eh? And he handed the elements enforcing their control, innocuous looking and nondescript, but specially designed to cripple Lewis's wits and hobble him physically. Yet he'd found a way to subvert their control and would soon put his resulting nimbleness of mind and body to use, escaping their chains. The house still looked exactly as it had throughout his childhood, but Lewis wasn't so easily taken in. The trappings of constructed reality had all the appearance of authenticity, so he waited. As he watched, the front door swung open, and a woman exited. Her hair was short, and she'd aged, but she was undoubtedly the person he remembered. Jolly, muscles aching from the strain of holding back. He wouldn't approach her till he was sure she was the real deal, and not some corrupted, lesser version of his sister. Yet after watching carefully the entire day, and not noticing any giveaways in her vicinity, Lewis decided to pounce as she was unlocking the front door at dusk upon her return. It was a simple matter to shove in after her and grab her, holding on tightly and smothering any sounds she might make to alert the collective programming that surrounded them. Shh. Shh. It's me, Jolly. Don't struggle, otherwise they'll hear, he whispered urgently, trying to keep his grip gentle but unyielding. Oddly, she didn't stop resisting, but rather became even more frantic in her movements. His hand became wet with what he assumed were tears, deciding him on moving further into the house to stifle any hysteria she might unleash. After a significant amount of time, her movements became sluggish, and she gasped for breath. So he finally thought it safe to set her down gently on the couch. She immediately crawled to the furthest point, curled into a ball, and sobbed quietly as she shot him furtive glances. Lewis felt indescribably disappointed, because this proved what he had feared. The real Jolly would never be scared of him, especially not once she knew it was him. This Jolly didn't love him unconditionally, like his real sister did. She looked at him like you would a stranger and a threat. He could feel his heart breaking. What are you doing here, Lou? It whispered, looking at him with reddened eyes that somehow conveyed a soul-deep terror, a submerged hysteria. He genuinely couldn't get over how realistic the programming on these droids were. Fake Jolly looked exactly how he'd imagine real Jolly would look if a psychopathic madman had her cornered in anticipation of butchering her. "Why do you think I'm here?" he asked, allowing his head to loll against the couch back. Although he felt hopelessness swamp him, dragging him under and stripping him of his energy, he still experienced the need to test this rendition's capabilities. There was a pause as he noticed its hand reaching beneath the cushion and pressing down on something. He didn't really care. He knew the others would come for him and return him to his imprisonment, but he would use his little bit of freedom to question not Jolly. Are you here about Mum and Dad? Or are you here for me this time? Not Jolly's voice wobbled. Why would I be here for Mum and Dad? He frowned, trying to concentrate, but it felt like he was listening underwater. Because of what you did to them, it suddenly shrieked, looking enraged and distraught at the same time. So realistic. They must do it with some kind of mirroring application. What I did? Lewis was absolutely nonplussed as a kind of horrified realization crept over fake Jolly's face. You still don't remember, do you? You don't know. Its look of wretched acceptance on the too familiar face was almost too much to bear. What is it I'm supposed to know, Jolly? Is it the great secret that nothing is real, not even you? I already know that. He watched her, despite his vision flickering at the edges. He was beyond exhausted, his last hope of not being alone in a world of artificial intelligence and technology having been dashed. Imitation. Jolly's head shook slowly from side to side, blue and red lights flashing across its face and rendering it ghoulishly artistic. Must be the tell he'd been looking for all day. Lewis gripped the handle of the scalpel he'd pinched during his escape, now stashed in his back pocket. It would only be right to end this travesty of an imitation of his beloved sister. But she was still talking. No, Lou. You don't remember becoming sick while living in Mav's basement, away from us all, and then threatening me with a knife during one of your episodes. Her look was sorrowful now. He paused in grasping the blade, feeling the weirdness of this synchrony. A nebulous image flashed through his mind, like a half-remembered dream of Jolly, long-haired and still youthful, lying on a blood-soaked tile floor, sobbing and shrieking in agony. Lewis shook his head to get rid of the intrusive thought. They were manipulating him. They were playing with his sense of reality. like they always did. Yet, still the droid, pretending to be jolly, continued. You don't remember killing Mum and Dad during a psychotic break, do you? Again, the flicker of an image, and then another, splayed limbs in a gruesome display, too horrible for Louis to even comprehend, not to mention the bloodied knife clutched in his own hand in that self-same scene. It wasn't real. It must be an induced hallucination. But mostly, you don't remember these things, or that we've discussed them many times over the years. You keep forgetting that all of this, everything, is real, except for your perception of reality, Lou. For the merest instant, Louis fully understood that the spoon hadn't bent, only for the door to burst open and his epiphany to escape him in the aftermath. He became, once more, the last remaining human in a made-up world, escaping nothing. I felt the light before my eyes actually saw it, warm and soft, almost tangible, like a blanket draped across my skin. How long had I been lying there? I tried pushing myself up from the ground, but nothing seemed to want to work properly. It was as though I'd never attempted to move before. Finally, begrudgingly, my body began to obey my brain. I turned over and began to sit up as I blinked and squinted against the blinding yellow that seemed less a comforter and more an attacker now. My ears were coming to life as my hands instinctively moved to cover them in hopes to drown out the high-pitched ringing. Slowly, my sight and hearing both began to come into focus. Dust hovered in the air around me. What had just happened? As I stood up, I racked my brain for anything that could help me understand my surroundings. My legs were as untrustworthy as my memory, however, so I quickly sat back down on the dark green grass. Okay, let's try this again, I encouraged my limbs. I took my time getting on my feet, watching my legs carefully as they strained. I had no coverings on my feet. I had no coverings on the rest of my body either, it seemed. Scanning the horizon, there seemed to be no one around to notice my nakedness. Nothing I could see indicated that there were any others at all, actually. I began walking towards the hill that lay in front of me. It was steep, but not so steep that my aching, wobbly legs couldn't manage to navigate it with a little help from my hands. When I reached the peak, I could see for what seemed like miles in every direction. Hello? I called to my left. Hello? I called again. Is anybody there? Where was everyone else? I began to walk down the hill, continuing in the same direction. Hundreds of large, sharp rocks jutted from the ground, as though driven up by some unnatural force. I had to dodge cracks in the ground that wound incoherently about the land. Oddly enough, they seemed to be slowly closing rather than expanding. Hello? I called again. Is anybody there?" I yelled. Everything around me was unfamiliar. Why couldn't I remember what happened? Was there anyone else? Or was I the only one who... No, I couldn't think like that. There must be others. I am in the middle of nowhere. There is no indication of civilization around me at all. So why should there be others here? There must be others. It wasn't a question of if, but of where. "Hello!" I screamed, nevertheless. I couldn't convince my mind that I would be out here all alone. The only response was the sound of a soft breeze, rustling trees in the distance. The sky around me was dark as my concern grew. I suddenly felt very exposed. The only safe place seemed to be the grove of trees that the breeze had discovered, so I started walking that way. Quicker, more quickly. Finally, I was running. Fear began to overtake me and drive me. At last, I stepped into the darkness of the woods and worked to catch my breath before examining my new surroundings. My eyes adjusted to the dim light quickly. Hundreds of trees surrounded me, but in the trees, I could see creatures moving about, jumping from limb to limb, flapping their wings for balance. Birds. Birds are here. That's a really good sign. What else? I walked forward, moving leaves and branches away from my face, pushing deeper into the woods. A low rumble that stopped me in my tracks began to emerge from the shadows. I could feel my heart rate quicken as a large animal stepped into what little light could penetrate the canopy. Its yellow eyes captured that light and threw it back at me as it brought its long, sharp fangs. I couldn't move, but I wasn't sure I wanted to either. The large cat walked towards me as it snarled softly. It sniffed my bare skin before letting out a chilling roar. My eyes closed tightly, but no other aspect of my body was capable of responding. "Ah, he's over here," I heard someone speak. "Seems the tiger found him," the voice chuckled. The words seemed to come from every direction all at once. The tiger backed away and trotted back into the shadows. I followed her lead. While my mind told me I should have been relieved to hear the sound of another, something in me was trembling and fearful. I crouched down behind a tree, hoping the shroud of bushes would shield me until I could learn more. "You hide from me?" The voice was louder and echoed in my brain. I searched the woods frantically, but saw no one. Then I heard rustling in the trees and the sound of footsteps on the ground. "Run!" I obeyed my instincts and forced my body to move, retracing the path I'd used to come into the woods. Getting out, getting to the light, was my only goal. "Now you run?" The voice that still seemed to surround me questioned. "Where will you go?" There is nothing. Exploding out of the trees and into the light, I pressed on towards one of the large shards of stone that pierced the landscape and slid behind it. My uncovered legs scraped against the ground, opening up small gashes. I watched the blood trickle from me like a foreign substance, red and dark, until finally I shook my mind free and turned toward the dangerous grove of trees to watch, to wait. The voice was right. There is nothing. Why do you run? Why do you hide? The voice boomed inside my mind, but I saw no one. My fear turned to anger and frustration. Why do you hide? There is nothing. There is no one. I am alone. I am the last one. What did you do to them? What did I do to who? The others. Just do it to me. If I'm the last, just do it to me. The last? Oh no, you are not the last. Quite the contrary. You are the first, but we will make more.